Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it. And now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and he threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now one of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything, and you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." You know, this is one of three meals, you could say, that Jesus has after his resurrection. The first one, he appears to the disciples back in the upper room, and he asks them for something to eat. That's probably just to indicate to them that he has a real body. It's not a ghost. Another one is when the two travelers are on their way to Emmaus, and they're walking alongside Jesus for a long time, and they don't recognize him until they go into the home and Jesus breaks bread before them, and it says their eyes are opened and they see him for who he really is. And then this third one where Jesus meets with his disciples in this almost comical way where he's calling out to them in the boat and having them haul in more fish. But the reason I wanted us to look at this on Easter morning is to show what exactly the resurrection means for us. What it meant for Peter was that he was restored back to that relationship with Jesus. It's interesting, they're back around a fire where earlier, right before the crucifixion, Peter is at a fire, and that's when he denies Jesus. How many times? 3 times. And here they are on the beach now. The smell of the fire might have been bringing back to mind that terrible night. You know, and so for Jesus in his love and in his grace to restore Peter 3 times, just like he denied him 3 times. So what happened between the denial and this restoration? The death and resurrection of Jesus. That's a picture of what the resurrection means, is that Jesus in his grace died for us and rose again. And because of that, he can restore our relationship with God. What did you guys see in this text?
Yes. Well, what stood out to me was Peter goes back fishing. You know, he goes back to his old former way of life, and he brings the disciples with him. It really shows how much in despair that he was, and probably really was devastated by the fact that he had denied Jesus. And he's saying, well, I guess that call and everything that he said is not going to happen because I messed up. So I'm just going to go back to my old way of life, which is to go fishing, go back to what's familiar. right? And so we see this picture of them fishing, and this is where Jesus comes to meet him. This is the very place when Peter was first called, is where he goes back to restore him. And what's really powerful is in verse 5, Jesus calls out to them and he says, "Children, do you have any fish?" It's interesting that Jesus doesn't say fellow brothers or friends, but he calls them children, which really shows us, wow, this is the fulfillment of what Jesus did on the cross, that he reconciled us back to God the Father through his death and resurrection, and now we can all be called children of God. And so it's this invitation to adoption, to sonship, that he's extending to Peter and the disciples and to the rest of us.
Amen. Very good.
I like that. It's interesting, I hadn't thought of it before, but Peter is sort of like the prodigal son. You know, he's made some poor choices. He's betrayed Jesus, whom he pledged his life to, and he said he would honor him and do whatever he needed. And here he is, just out, you know, just full of joy. He abandons the boat and the fish and all these good things that are happening. He throws on that outer garment. He runs, you know, he's swimming madly to get to Jesus. So again, sort of like some of the other characters we've been looking at during the Lenten series, there's this act of full-hearted devotion and desire to be with God, and that's kind of the better thing. And I noticed when he gets to the part of Jesus questioning him, I sort of have tried to reflect on what might that tone have been when he says, you know, he says, "Lord, you know that I love you." Was there almost a defensiveness, kind of a, "Oh, you know that, and I don't want to really deal with the underlying meaning, which is you question that because you know I betrayed you." But it's interesting, the third time around is when we see, when the question keeps coming back, we see this true sort of conviction or contrition on his part. It's as if Peter's able to say, yes, in that deep place in me where I know that I've questioned you, and I know I haven't stood by you. That's the place where I want you to really hear, yes, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And that to me just gave me hope for all the places that God is still doing a work in me to become even more devoted and receive the grace that's already being offered.
You know, the number 3 is interesting to me, that it was 3 times he denied him, and there's just a thoroughness to the grace of God. And that's hopeful for me as well. It means like every time I betray God, every time I sin, there's enough of his grace. He can be thorough in restoring me back to him, as you said, as a child to a father. It's not like there's a big enough sin or too many sins I could commit that it would extend beyond the limits of his grace. That every single thing I've ever done against him, he will restore all of that back on the final day when we are all in the household of our Father as adopted sons and daughters.